James was a young man from the East but lives in Abuja, Nigeria. He was tall, with smooth dark skin, and his white teeth shone brightly whenever he smiled. Girls couldn't resist him, and he knew it. Wherever James went, his charm made heads turn. Some said he looked like a Nollywood actor, others claimed he was too handsome for his own good. James loved the attention, and he didn't hold back. James had one problem: he couldn't control himself. Every time he met a girl, he would flirt, and most times, things went further. He couldn't count how many girls he had been with. It was as if he was under a spell. He didn't care about their backgrounds or their stories. As long as they showed interest, he went after them. In James's village, there was an old belief. They said anyone who slept with a relative, knowingly or unknowingly, would face serious consequences. No one could explain what these consequences were, but the elders often warned the young people. James heard these stories as a child, but he never paid attention. To him, they were just tales to scare people. One evening, James sat with his best friend, Musa, under a mango tree near their compound. "James, you are playing with fire," Musa said, shaking his head. "What do you mean?" James laughed, biting into a juicy mango. "You know what I mean. You are always running after girls. Don't you fear that one day you might cross the line?" James rolled his eyes. "Musa, don't start with your preaching. I'm young, I'm enjoying life. That's all." "But what about the elders' warning? What if you unknowingly—" "Stop, Musa," James interrupted. "I don't want to hear it. I'm careful. Besides, Abuja is a big place. What are the chances of me meeting a relative like that?" Musa sighed. "You always think you're untouchable. Just remember, life has a way of surprising people." James shrugged. He didn't like to think about the consequences of his actions. He preferred to live in the moment. Weeks turned into months, and James continued his reckless behavior. However, things took a turn when he received a letter from his company. "Dear James," it read, "you have been transferred to Lagos for a new assignment. Report to the Lagos office on Monday." At first, James wasn't happy. He loved Abuja and didn't want to leave his friends or his lifestyle behind. But as the days passed, he started to see it as an opportunity. Lagos was a bigger city, and he was sure there would be more excitement waiting for him there. On Sunday night, James packed his bags, said goodbye to his friends, and boarded a bus to Lagos early Monday morning. Lagos was everything James had imagined: bustling streets, tall buildings, and endless opportunities. His new office was located on Victoria Island, one of the most expensive and beautiful parts of the city. On his first day, James dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers. He wanted to make a good impression. As he walked into the office, his eyes immediately caught sight of a young woman sitting at a desk near the window. She had flawless brown skin, big brown eyes, and long, braided hair that fell over her shoulders. She wore a blue dress that fit her perfectly. James felt his heart skip a beat. "Good morning," she said with a smile, looking up from her computer. "Good morning," James replied, struggling to hide his excitement. "I'm James. Today's my first day here." "I'm Grace," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Lagos." From that moment, James couldn't stop thinking about Grace. She was different from the other girls he had met. She was smart, confident, and had a warmth about her that made him feel comfortable. Over the next few weeks, James and Grace grew close. They worked on the same projects and often had lunch together. James found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't experienced before. One Friday evening, after work, James and Grace decided to grab dinner at a local restaurant. As they sat across from each other, laughing and sharing stories, James felt a strong connection. "Grace, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice serious. "What is it?" she asked, leaning in. "I like you," he confessed. "I've never felt this way about anyone before." Grace blushed. "James, I like you too. But we work together. Won't it be complicated?" "I don't care," James said. "You're special to me. I want to see where this goes." Grace smiled, and that evening, they shared their first kiss. James and Grace's relationship grew quickly. They spent weekends exploring Lagos together, visiting beaches, trying out new restaurants, and attending local events. For the first time in his life, James felt happy and fulfilled. However, strange things began to happen. One evening, while they were watching a movie at James's apartment, Grace noticed a scar on his arm. "That's an interesting mark," she said, pointing at it. "How did you get it?" "Oh, this?" James replied. "It's not a scar, it's a tribal mark. My dad gave it to me when I was a baby. He said it's a family tradition." Grace's eyes widened. "That's strange. I have a similar mark." James looked at her arm and froze. Her mark was almost identical to his. "Maybe it's a coincidence," he said nervously, trying to brush it off. But Grace couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, she started noticing other similarities. Their facial features were strikingly alike, similar nose, same dimples when they smiled. It was as if they were mirror images of each other. One day, Grace decided to confront her mother. "Mum," she began, "can you tell me more about my dad? I've never met him, and I feel like I need to know more about where I come from." Grace's mother hesitated. "Why are you asking about this now?" "There's this guy," Grace started, but her voice trailed off. Her mother sighed. "Grace, there's something I never told you. Your father was a military man. We met in Abuja many years ago. His name was Major Okonkwo." Grace felt her heart drop. That was James's last name. Could it be? Days turned into weeks, and James and Grace tried to adjust to the bitter truth. Their once joyful connection now felt like a heavy chain dragging them into an abyss. They agreed to end their relationship and keep the truth between them, but the emotional weight lingered. James especially felt the guilt like a fire burning inside him. One morning, James woke up to a sharp pain in his chest. It wasn't like any pain he had ever felt before, it was intense, spreading to his arms and back. At first, he thought it was just stress from everything that had happened, but the pain grew worse as the days passed. He tried to ignore it, brushing it off when Grace asked how he was feeling. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just tired." But Grace noticed his hands trembling when he picked up a glass of water. His usually bright eyes were dull and sunken. "You're not fine, James," Grace said one evening. "You need to see a doctor." James shook his head. "It's nothing. I'll be okay." That night, James had a nightmare. In the dream, He was back in his village, standing in the middle of the town square. The elders were gathered around him, their faces stern. "You have broken the sacred law," one of them said. "I didn't know," James pleaded. The elder shook his head. "Ignorance does not protect you from the consequences. You must pay for what you have done." Suddenly, James felt his body grow heavy. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. A shadowy figure loomed over him, whispering words he couldn't understand. When he woke up, his body was drenched in sweat, and the pain in his chest was worse than ever. James finally decided to visit the clinic, but the doctors were baffled. All his tests came back normal. "There's nothing wrong with you physically," one doctor said. "Are you under a lot of stress?" James didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. The pain wasn't just physical, it was as if his soul was being torn apart. Back at work, James's performance began to suffer. He couldn't focus, and his once confident demeanor was replaced with anxiety and fear. Grace, too, was struggling. She had become withdrawn, avoiding her colleagues and spending most of her time alone. One day, Grace received a phone call from her mother. "Grace," her mother said, her voice trembling, "I had a strange dream about you last night. You were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to fall. I think something terrible is about to happen. Please, come home." Grace's heart sank. She hadn't told her mother the full truth about what had happened, but now she wondered if her mother's intuition had picked up on something deeper. She decided to visit a spiritual leader in Lagos, a man known for his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. The spiritual leader, Baba Aid, listened carefully as Grace explained her situation. She told him about her father, about James, and about the strange pain that James had been experiencing. Baba Aid closed his eyes and murmured a prayer. After a long silence, he looked at Grace. "The bond between siblings is sacred," he said. "To break that bond in such a way brings a curse, even if it was done unknowingly. The pain James feels is the weight of that curse." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "What can we do? Is there a way to lift the curse?" Baba Aid nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it will not be easy. You must both return to the place where this began, your village. There, you must confess the truth to the elders and seek their forgiveness. Only they can guide you on how to cleanse yourselves." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Returning to James's village meant exposing their secret to everyone. The thought of the shame and judgment terrified her, but she knew they had no choice. When she told James what Baba Aid had said, he resisted at first. "I can't go back there," he said. "What will people think? My family, my friends, they'll never look at me the same way." "James, if we don't do this, the pain will only get worse," Grace said. "We have to face it." Reluctantly, James agreed. They both took time off work and traveled to James's village. As they approached, memories of his childhood flooded back to him: the dusty roads, the sound of children playing, the smell of roasted corn. But now, those memories felt tainted. The village elders were seated under the large baobab tree in the center of the village. When James and Grace approached, the elders looked up, their expressions curious. "James," one of them said, "it has been a long time since we saw you. What brings you back?" James hesitated, his palms sweating. Grace squeezed his hand for reassurance. "There is something we need to confess," James began, his voice shaking. He told them everything, how he had met Grace in Lagos, how they had fallen for each other, and how they had discovered they were siblings. The elders listened in silence, their faces growing more serious with each word. When James finished, the head elder stood up. His voice was firm as he spoke. "You have broken the sacred law," he said. "And now, you must atone." The head elder, a man with deep wrinkles and a voice like thunder, instructed James and Grace to prepare for a sacred cleansing ceremony. To break the curse, you must purify yourselves and seek forgiveness, not only from the ancestors but also from each other, he explained. This is the only way to restore balance. The next morning, the entire village gathered by the sacred river. The elders led James and Grace to the water's edge, where they knelt. A calabash filled with water and sacred herbs was placed before them. The head elder chanted prayers, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors to witness the cleansing. He dipped a feather into the calabash and sprinkled the water over James and Grace, who bowed their heads in humility. "You must also forgive yourselves," the elder said, his tone softer now. "You were ignorant of the truth, but ignorance does not erase the harm. Learn from this, and let it guide your steps in the future." James and Grace exchanged tearful apologies. James held Grace's hands tightly and said, "I am sorry, Grace. I never meant to hurt you. I will carry this lesson with me for the rest of my life." Grace nodded, her tears falling into the river. "I forgive you, James. And I hope we both find peace after this." When the ceremony was over, the elders declared that the curse was lifted. But they warned James and Grace that this experience should serve as a lifelong reminder to live with wisdom and restraint. James and Grace returned to Lagos, each changed by the experience. James no longer pursued fleeting pleasures. He realized how his reckless behavior had led to deep pain, not just for himself but for others as well. He dedicated himself to personal growth, focusing on his work and building meaningful relationships. Grace, too, found strength in the lessons she had learned. She forgave her mother for keeping secrets and worked to rebuild trust in her family. Though their paths diverged, James and Grace remained connected by the lessons they had learned together. Thank you for joining me on this journey through James and Grace's story. Life is full of challenges, but every challenge holds a lesson that can make us stronger. Stories like this remind us of the importance of love, forgiveness, and self-awareness. If you enjoyed this story and want more inspiring, dramatic, and thought-provoking tales, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Let's continue exploring stories that touch our hearts and teach us powerful life lessons. Remember, your support keeps us going, so don't forget to like, share, and comment on this video. Stay tuned, more incredible stories are on the way. Thank you, and see you in the next video.